Okay, so I try to have my eyes open and get an understanding of what's going on around us. And as I look around of what's happening, specifically even in our nation right now, this thought came to my mind. Progressives, that's who's primarily in charge of our nation right now. And I thought about this. Progressives, that's an interesting term because the way I look at it, progressives should actually be called regressives. And so that's the topic of today's Daily Dose. I hope you hang with me on this one. So here's how I see it. The very one that call themselves progressives, instead of helping our culture progress, are actually causing us to regress. In other words, instead of things going forward and getting better, things are actually going backwards and getting worse. Progressives, they aren't taking us forward, they're taking us backward. Now here are some examples I came up with rather quickly. It's not too hard. Open your eyes, look around. Let's look at women's rights first. Women's rights are regressing instead of progressing. Women are being driven out of the restrooms even. They can't even have their own restrooms because of progressive woke agendas. Women are being driven out of women's sports by men and this progressive woke transgender ideology. Women are being taken advantage of by progressive organizations such as Planned Parenthood, who use them. They use women as a revenue source as they sell them on this unthinkable act of aborting their babies. Women's rights are not progressing. They're regressing at an alarming rate. What about racial unity? Is it progressing or regressing? Well, there's a lot of progress that's happened in our nation over the last 200 plus years. It's been astounding until the progressives stepped in and are taking over. The progressives are bringing back segregation as they're calling people victims again or perpetrators of racial injustice. Everybody's either a victim or you're a racist, essentially. Racial equality isn't progressing right now. Not in our nation. It's regressing under the leadership and rhetoric of the progressives. They've come up with and they're promoting this thing called CRT, critical race theory, which declares that everything about American society is racist and you're either a victim of racism or you're a perpetrator of racism. There's no middle ground. So again, segregating, putting us in classes, putting us on different sides instead of bringing us together. Critical race theory separates our society, identifying us again into groups, into classifications of each person. You're either oppressed or you're the oppressor, solely based on, check this out, the color of your skin. Do you call that progressive? That's regressive, man. That's just wrong. That's not progress. It's going backwards. What about the areas in our society of crime and homelessness? Is it progressing, getting better? Is crime going down? Is homelessness disappearing? No, not at all. Not in this nation, not right now. Not under the leadership of progressives. We're watching our largest cities that are run by progressive mayors and council members regress into cesspools of crime and death. While at the same time, what's happening in those communities? Homelessness is skyrocketing. And so now that brings us to the economy. Let's look at that. Is the economy progressing under the leadership of the progressives? No. Rather, we're seeing real economic regression in the form of record-breaking inflation. The middle class is falling behind, and all the government handouts are doing, they're creating a nation of dependence instead of a nation of flourishing producers, using their God-given gifts. Come on now. But we're not allowed to talk about any of this stuff. You can't criticize a progressive. See, our freedom of speech is under massive attack as censorship is everywhere. Say something that challenges a progressive and you're deemed as someone who's spouting hate speech. You're canceled. Big tech progressives drive you off their platforms. Again, under progressives, we are regressing as a free society. Take, for instance, the freedom of religion. Progressives have turned it on its head and have replaced the freedom of religion with the freedom from religion. Another example of regression, right? And they're programming this regressive thought into our children. This progressive regression is everywhere in our public education systems as they focus on wokeness instead of actually teaching our children the essentials of reading, writing, and math, right? Instead of teaching our kids how to think critically, how to use their minds and look at things properly, they're programming our children into being progressives just like them, who just nod their heads. Okay, whatever you say, government, whatever you say, leaders, it's sick, it's wrong. And so what our world doesn't need is more progressives. It doesn't need more progressive leaders. What we do need is godly leadership. We don't need progressive thinking. Rather, what we need is biblical thinking. If we want to live in a society that's truly progressing, that's growing, that's getting together and being healthier, then we need more of God, not more of man's failed, broken ideology, and specifically progressivism right now. But any ideology, from the left, from the right, or anywhere in between, if it's from man, it's going to ultimately break down and regress. See, what we need is truth, not more man-made schemes. And we need to look at the world God's way now, through His lens, through the Bible. We need to ground our children in the Word of God, in truth. Like it says in Proverbs 22:6, that train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. And let me tell you what, this truth, this precept works both ways. If we train up a child in progressive ideology, if we allow progressives to train up our children and our kids, they're going to grow up to be progressives, bringing more regression in their lives, in their family, and in our culture and society. However, when we train up our children to know God, to fear God, to glorify God, and to stand on His truth, they will not depart from that. They will not regress. So how are you training your children? Who are you letting train your children? By the way, if you remember Evident Life Church, we are here to help you make the choice for Christian education for your children. If you need help with that, we'll come alongside of you. We'll walk you through it. We'll even provide real resources, even financial resources. So don't settle for progressive ideology to be programmed and shoved down the throat of your children. No, no, no. We don't need that. Your kids need the Bible. They need a biblical worldview. And so the way to true progress is doing things God's way. The progress comes from the Lord. One more thing, check it out in 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18. It says, "And we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, we are being transformed into His image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." Where does it come from? Where does the progression come from? It comes from the Lord. And finally, listen to this truth from Job 17:9. The righteous keep moving forward. In other words, the righteous keep progressing. And those with clean hands become stronger and stronger. And with that, I just want to say, be blessed.